Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, October 25th, 2024, and on the show today, we are going to do the Feedback Friday thing where I share some of the comments that you gave us this week. Going to get a question on keeping the deer fence clean and wrap it up with some mulch talk and a Friday field note. So let's do it. All right, so yesterday afternoon, I got some more cover crop in. I'm still sowing crimson clover, rye, and vetch right now, but I've started to add some lacy phacelia into that mix as well. I don't like to plant that one too early or it will die in the freezes, but if you plant it in like late October, like right now, it will survive and flower in the spring, and it makes amazing flowers in May here. When you couple that with some peas, cilantro, and crimson clover, the pollinators go absolutely bananas. With most of those crops, even some of the generally winter-killed ones, including field peas, if you plant them late enough, they will generally survive the winter in our climate at least, which is Central Kentucky, Zone 6B, USA, go Cats. Then you will just have to deal with them in the spring, which is fine because dealing with cover crops in the spring is my specialty. We'll get into more of that a little later when the time comes, maybe when you least expect it. I don't know, we'll see. I have a few more plots where I'd like to get some cover crops in this year before the winter really sets in. At least for us at this point, the window for any sort of winter killed cover crops is closed. So for now, it's all about those winter hardy cover crops, ones that will just survive the entire winter. I'll reserve a day next week to talk more about putting gardens to bed for the winter and best practices there. But today, because it's Friday, that means it is Feedback Friday, where we get some of your comments from the week. So we're going to start with a comment from Monday that I thought was a helpful addition to the conversation about silvo-horticulture, that is planting trees in and around gardens. This one comes from Linda Taylor 7718, who writes, quote, love your channel, and I don't usually comment, but I felt compelled to. In this case, I have trees around some of my annual crops, and I have to dig many trenches to stop roots from invading my beds, sucking out all the nutrients and water, end quote. Indeed, for whatever reason, this is just not something I mentioned in that episode, but I asked them if there were trees that they have and have not had trouble with, and they said, quote, I have a variety of fruit and ornamental trees here in Vancouver, BC. None were well behaved, but I would have to say cherry was the worst. My trenches had to be 2 feet deep with barriers to stop roots from coming in. I would find large roots down that deep and then follow them up into my beds, making for a solid mass of feeder roots. Of course, they seek out that good, rich soil you've worked so hard to make. And that trench had better be very wide because those roots will circle around and back in, end quote. Now, I thought that was a very helpful comment, and something that has also been a theme this week is just how appreciating how smart and insightful and experienced so many of the commenters are over there at YouTube. To all of you over there who add stories and anecdotes and thoughtful insight, you all are much appreciated and an incredible resource I'm lucky to have. So thank you. Anyway, to that point, I'd love to hear other stories like this about trees you have and have not had major issues with in the gardens and best practices you've found for keeping tree roots out from causing, or at least from causing major issues in your growing beds. In that forthcoming silvo-horticulture book that I referenced in that episode, and again, I'll link it in the show notes, they do dedicate a relatively significant amount of time to not just how to plant trees, but how to plan for root management in the gardens, which I think is very helpful, but is also a section that anyone planting trees in and around their garden should read carefully because there's not one simple solution. Root pruning with a spade shovel may be a necessity for some, especially those working in low mechanization situations like us. Like we have a small tractor, but we have a small tractor, like you walk behind it. Root barriers for some may also be important. As we start to add trees to our own garden here in Kentucky, I will keep you updated on how this goes. I am planning to somewhat hesitantly forego root barriers to begin and instead account for wider beds and semi-deep trenches, but we'll see if that was enough pretty quickly, I think. And it seems from that comment and other comments I should not grow cherry trees, which is really disappointing, as that seems to be a common problem tree. Let me know what you've learned from your experiences with trees in and around the gardens. All right, the next comment comes from the podcast I did with Alex Ball on Tuesday, where we talked a lot about his preferences to lease farmland after owning farmland for a while. This comment is from Alec Gaban, 6327. Not sure if I said that one right. They write, quote, "Can you help explore this topic, renting land? More, please. I can't afford to buy farmland, and it's normal for corn and soybean croppers to rent land. It's more likely that we can rent plots within farms. And the issues are lease lengths, water supply, electricity, and fencing, as well as temporary outbuildings." End quote. So thanks for the comment. And yeah, obviously best practices when it comes to leasing land is a mountain of a topic, and one that I will dedicate more time to as we go forward. For the immediate, if you're looking to market garden, at least, find the best possible situation that is as set up as humanly possible and is as close to where you want to live or do live as possible as well. Hopefully it has some infrastructure, some clean water source or sources, electricity preferably. That one's maybe not as necessary as the other ones, but those sorts of things. Not knowing the situation better, I can only make generic recommendations, but I generally would not recommend setting up shop bumped up against corn and soybeans. Maybe if you can rent an acre in between you and that farmer's fields on each side, you might be safe with that amount of buffer zone, but even still, you would also need to know how they spray herbicides and or pesticides, and if they're willing to be considerate about that on windier days. Some larger farms may employ crop dusting, like from airplanes, or even pay their local co-ops who may just spray when they have the chance indiscriminately, and that could end up contaminating, damaging, or straight up killing your gardens, if that chance is a windy day, for instance. I've heard and seen lots of horror stories around that, so you have to be careful. Leases should start as long-term as you can get them. I like the idea of starting with 5-year leases with the option of moving to 10 years after the first 3 years or something. What you don't want is a year-to-year lease where you end up putting a lot of work into something that at the end of that year, they're like, yeah, we're going to go a different direction. You want to make sure that the work you're investing in the soil and infrastructure, et cetera, is going to last for a while. What I would also do in terms of searching for land, though, is make a dream list of everything you want out of a rented piece of land. No single piece of land is going to meet all of the requirements or all of your dream. So you will have to decide which are the non-negotiables, like no water would be a non-negotiable for me, unless perhaps you're in a really wet environment and planning on doing something that does not rely on consistent irrigation. And then also add to that list those elements which you can work around, like no infrastructure, for instance. Again, I'll do a whole segment on leasing farms. I mean, the lease agreement itself is a whole segment, but we have lots of time to get to that stuff. Just make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. The show is not going to stop anytime soon. So we'll thoroughly cover that multiple times over. Last comment that I want to shout out comes from our forum, actually, at no-tillgrowers.com, from Sparkamus, who is an excellent and regular contributor over there, who writes, quote, "I like the format and content. I now watch this every morning during my precious coffee time." Insert the smiling and face emoji. "Husband loved the soccer references for what it's worth." End quote. Thanks, Sparkamus. And if you have not checked out the forum at no-tillgrowers.com, it is a great place to engage and ask specific questions. Again, one of the many free resources we try to grow ecological farming knowledge and access. So please take advantage of it. I also love to hear about people making a nice habit out of this show. That was sort of the goal, and is very cool to hear it. Often the show actually uploads right while I'm outside in the field, listening to one of my other daily podcasts per my own ritual. To have it be a podcast you can rely on that slots into your daily routine is very, very fun to hear. Also great to hear your husband loves the soccer references. I know not everyone does, but those people who don't will be excited to know that college basketball season has started. So you will soon be getting both soccer and college basketball references. So get excited. It's going to be great. Thanks as always for all the feedback this week. There was actually a ton of feedback on the biochar episodes that I won't have time to get into today, but I tried to sort of touch on it in yesterday's episode. Who knew biochar was such a heated topic? But I love the passion, and I just want to reiterate how impressed I am by the brilliance of so many of the people who follow this show. I can't always respond to all the great comments, or this show wouldn't exist, frankly, because there are a lot. But just know that I try to read as many as I can, and you all are you just rock. Up next, we'll get a quick question about keeping the deer fence clean. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. If you, the listener, want to support our work, you can do so at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come from, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Hopefully the show is adding $2 or $5 worth of value to your life per month. Supporting a month worth of shows for less than the price of a sandwich feels like a pretty sweet deal. Hopefully I can live up to that. Anyway, today's question comes from Patreon member Tracy M, who writes, "Hi, Jesse. I'm enjoying the new show." Thanks, Tracy. I have a couple of problems I have been trying to solve for a while now. Maybe you can help. We started deer fencing in 2019, really simple welded wire fencing, and it has worked great for keeping the deer out so far. But I'm really struggling keeping weeds out. They grow right through the fence and into my paths. Removing weeds grown through wire is torture. Here, I know what you mean. Tracy continues, "I have tried a few things. None are really working. We've used cardboard and wood chip mulch right up to the fence, which looks good for a while, but is completely ineffective against bindweed and quackgrass, which grow right under it or through it. I've used thick mulchy compost, which is easier to weed, but needs frequent cultivation, and it's impossible to get close to the fence. I've used fire, and while it did work well on the surface, the wood chips and mulchy compost are flammable, and it did nothing to the roots. The fence is now a bit buried, good for keeping out rabbits, but could possibly be pulled up if necessary. But with almost 2,000 feet of fence line, it's a daunting task. Any ideas on maintaining a fence line and stopping the grass roots? I can't stand the thought of landscape fabric and doubt that would work." End quote. Okay, so great question or questions here, Tracy. And I love the detail you put in there about what all you have tried. Now, unfortunately, you're not really going to like my answers probably, but if you are really trying to keep that fence row clean, your options are somewhat limited, to be frank, and there is not much you're going to be able to do about the roots. I mean, if you could go back in time and raise the fence 6 or 8 inches above the ground, you could just weed whack underneath it to maintain it. But I'm going to assume you want probably a different option. Like you said, it's a daunting task with 2,000 feet to have to unbury and pull up. Landscape fabric is probably going to require getting under the fence as well, which would likely just be a big undertaking. You would not want to just lay the landscape fabric up against the fence either because, well, the weeds would just kind of grow up behind it. You can probably see how so many conventional farmers resort to herbicide in fence management because the other options kind of suck. Now, there are some more environmentally friendly, quote unquote, natural herbicides you could try. There's various salt applications or acetic acids, acetic acid just being concentrated vinegar. Arbico Organics sells several OMRI approved, so these are permitted in organic farming herbicides. The main ingredients in these are things like ammoniated pelargonic salts derived from oil of the pelargonium, D-limonene, so like citrus peel concentrate, caprylic acid and capric acid, which come from things like coconut oil or palm kernel oil, goat milk, and I think there's some other animal fats. And then there's more herbicides and more options. Now, I do not have any experience with any of these, and the expense may not be worth it. You'd have to kind of math that one out. But if you were already trying mulches, I would think the cost can't be much more than that. Also, you may personally not want to use an herbicide, even if it's natural or organically approved. And I get that. Just because it's organic doesn't mean it's harmless, and you would still want to wear protection over your face and your skin. Personally, for our fences, I usually just weed whack the fences as best I can, which admittedly means they remain a little messy, to my neighbor's dismay. But at some point, trees and such start to grow through, which means more and more work year after year. Unfortunately, there is not a ton that can be done once the fence is up. That does not involve removing the woven wire and either putting in weed barrier or raising the bottom off the ground, like I said, for easier sort of cleaning with a string trimmer. But I hope if someone has a better idea, they'll let us know. Not everyone can or wants to simply let their fence go. So what ways have you found that actually work? Otherwise, I do hope that was at least somewhat helpful, Tracy. Sometimes the answers are not always answers, unfortunately. Okay, so when we come back, we'll dive into some mulch, figuratively dive. Be right back. So our work has always been about keeping farming information as free and open to the public as we possibly can, and that won't change. One way in which we make that possible, though, is through advertising on podcasts like this, on our YouTube channel, on our forum. and so on. So if you are a small farm-related company selling seeds or tools or something growers could use, or if you're an organization putting on some conference or offering a grant or looking for farmer contributors or something else farm-related that I'm not thinking of, get in touch with us at farmermichelle@no-tillgrowers.com. That's farmermichelle@no-tillgrowers.com. Supporting us helps to grow this work and grow farmers. So we all thank you. Again, that email is farmermichelle@no-tillgrowers.com, or you can find our contact information at no-tillgrowers.com. All right. Thanks, you all. Enjoy the show. Okay, so yesterday I mentioned an article that was in Growing for Market magazine that was essentially a small research study, but written out in lay terms, which was, again, awesome. I would love to see way more of that. Very cool. And today I thought I would just actually touch on one part of that study, which I found interesting. Now, the study is available to read for free online in all of its researchy, jargony goodness, or you can subscribe to Growing for Market magazine to read the more simplified version. I will link both in the show notes. Of course, describing all the details of the study would be profoundly boring to listen to, so I will just give you an overview of what they were studying and zero in on one part I kind of wanted to add some context to. Basically, they were testing 4 different tillage regimens, so conventional tillage, shallow tillage, no tillage, and no tillage plus tarping. And they were testing with those what they refer to as 3 types of mulch, but is actually 2 types of mulch. They were testing compost mulch and rye hay, cut green, plus no mulch at all. Anyway, one thing I liked about this particular study was that they weren't just measuring yield, but also labor requirements, economics, and soil results. And not to play the spoiler here or the dramatic oversimplifier, but in terms of yield and net returns and soil organic matter contributions, the compost mulch was the victor, especially when combined with the no-till tarping treatment, which, fine, that makes sense. That's one huge reason people use a deep compost mulch system. It's easy, it's relatively profitable if you can get reasonable compost at a fair price, and the labor to maintain it is relatively low. But the study also found that when they did the soil tests, the amount of nitrogen that was still available in the soil added to what had been harvested in the crops was less than what had been applied. In other words, a significant amount of nitrogen was going missing and unaccounted for, meaning it likely volatilized into the atmosphere or leached into the groundwater. This, of course, is one of the biggest concerns from agronomists and researchers with this deep compost mulching, also known as no-dig if you have a cool accent, that large compost applications can create pollution from both nitrogen and phosphorus in particular. However, I don't know that you can really derive that specific result from this study for one reason. They grew only 1 crop per season in this study. Now, this isn't a judgment of the study itself or the researchers, because I do think it's a well-designed study and other findings had a lot of value. And again, I love that these researchers put together a simplified version of it, so props to them. But it is a criticism of that particular finding. I don't know anyone who would use that much compost mulch on a bed and grow only 1 crop per season, especially not just winter squash and cabbage, because those are 2 very low profit crops. So before we know what the nitrogen loss is after 3 or 4 successive crops in a season and possibly a cover crop, I'm not sure that recommendations can be made from those specific findings, as additional crops will likely prevent some amount of the nitrogen loss. In other words, if you're growing more crops, you're probably going to lose less nitrogen. However, they do make a suggestion that if you start a garden in the sort of deep compost mulch way, perhaps easing back or eliminating compost additions after a couple seasons and switching to no mulch or hay mulches would be a good idea. I honestly don't think that's a bad idea or a bad recommendation, and we actually do that in our gardens, where we are only applying the deep layer every few years, with the deepest layers in the beginning and subsequent layers only as needed. But as that mulch layer decreases, as it just kind of breaks down, the weed pressure increases. So those additional mulches and cultivations will become important. So effectively, I would love this same study, but in the market garden context, where more than 1 crop per season is produced. Because as we are always saying, and as I designed the Living Soil Handbook around, it's not just about keeping the soil covered and undisturbed as much as possible, but also keeping it planted as much as possible. Anyway, big cheers for the researchers like these, finally giving us some research on these methods in general, and then giving them to us in a readable format. Love it and appreciate it. Love you all and appreciate you all as well. I'm going to wrap it up there and get out of here for a big weekend of harvesting and then soccer coaching. This is the penultimate game weekend for us, penultimate being a word that soccer people seem to really love more than any other industry, with next week being the league tournament, which marks the end of the soccer season. The end of the soccer season is always a sad time for me. Gonna miss the kids a lot and the challenge of coaching, but much like farming, will take the winter to improve my coaching education and get ready for this spring. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and to the folks at No-Till Growers for their support. Make sure to stay tuned for your Friday field note, but first, got to do the Patreon shoutouts from patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of October, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Anna Kristen, Christine Bell. Oh man, if the next one had been like Bell Yoder, that would have been awesome, but it's Dwight Yoder. Dwight Yoder is actually, I don't think this is them, but is the name of a friend I had in like high school who was a better skateboarder than I was, and also was one of those people that was just like talented at everything. And so I bet he's off like running a really awesome farm and daily podcast somewhere. Shout outs to Dwight. Who else? The Gardening Nutritionist and Rebecca Zezus. It's a fun name to say, Rebecca. Shout out to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. I really appreciate you all. It's been a fun week. Next week will be even funner. That's a word. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your Friday field note. Bye. So I think I've talked before about, maybe even in the first episode or something, where like I really like having a balance between like physical work and mental work and all that stuff. And since I started the daily, and it takes up a huge portion of my capacity, of my brain, of my time, I've like really started enjoying my afternoons out in the field. And, I just planted, a couple thousand lettuce plants and got some cover crop seed in, and it was just like a really nice afternoon. It was pretty efficient, and I keep being like, this is amazing. Like farming's awesome. And then I realized it's fall and it's been like 70 degrees every day and perfect every single day. And I'm like, oh, right, this may be a different story in the summer. So we shall see. All right. You all have a great weekend. Bye.